Hello and welcome to the very first Pentlands Meet a Triathlete. This is something we'll be trying on a monthly basis, excluding December, for as long as it works really. And the main objectives are an excuse for the club social get-together, any excuse will do, and also for us to learn a little bit more about all of our members. But we'll also bring in a few top tips and maybe some experiences and some lessons learned as we go along the way. We will vary the guests of the day as we go, amongst our members mainly, but also occasionally bringing in the odd guest from outside the club. We have a live audience. Live audience, say hello. There you are. Hello, live audience. Excellent. And we will be looking to get some questions from them later on. So if you're watching a recording of this, it would be great to see you here in person for the future events. And we'll talk more about who's up next in the January event at the end of this recording. We're not live streaming this one, but something we can do, and we will look at bringing that into the future, perhaps. For this event, though, I'm just very pleased to welcome and introduce Warren Barton as our very first Meet a Triathlete guest. Warren, great to have you here. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you.
Not feeling the pressure, hopefully?
No, not at all. Not after that intro.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for I'll just get you into the picture here. You've moved already. Thank you very much for basically having the courage to do this.
Thank you.
You're going to set the benchmark for everyone to roll from there.
To exceed, yeah.
So hopefully between us, we won't put future guests off. Okay, so we'll start at the very beginning. Let's go back to when you were at school and your sporting activities and interests. What were the things that got you out and about in that warm weather compared to where we are here in Scotland?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was thinking about this. So I wasn't very sporty at school. In South Africa, it was very much like, traditional sports, rugby, cricket. That was pretty much it, athletics. But I've always really enjoyed cycling and spent a lot of time outdoors riding my bike or just running around the garden. And then in my teens, I got into cycling in a bit more of a big way. Actually joined a cycling club, and I think if there'd actually been the opportunity to compete at cycling, I probably would have done. But that just wasn't a thing back in the 80s. So yeah, I don't exactly have like a very illustrious sporting past, or at least not in my childhood. But I've always enjoyed being outdoors, doing stuff, being active, which I think has followed me through into adulthood. Yeah.
And much competitive things at school, particularly with cycling?
Yeah, cycling was very much like competing against my mates. I think as I said, if you could have, if there was like organized races, I definitely would have taken part in that. But it was mostly like racing each other to and from school and stuff like that. Yeah.
I remember also growing up in South Africa like you did, the BMX was probably one of the most competitive and readily available things for kids. Did you ever come across that at all?
No, it was like, strange enough, I got into road cycling, which was quite unusual. A friend of mine got into it, and then I started riding with the local club, the Cresta Wheelers. But it was really strange because like we were like two teenage boys going out with mostly blokes in their 40s. It wasn't that different. So yeah, I'm not quite sure how that all came about, but it was it's certainly I love going out cycling, and would go out on my own midweek and ride like 50k. So yeah, quite unusual like that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. From my own experience growing up there, cycling actually was the one thing that probably wasn't readily available. I think I personally was exposed to just about every sport going apart from road cycling, and from a club or kind of group point of view. So you found that niche when the rest of us weren't involved in it.
I could have been Chris Froome like 10 years before.
You could have been, yeah.
Maybe with a bit more talent though.
Could have, would have, should have. Anything could have happened. Yeah. So then, at some point, you moved to the UK, and then into early adulthood. Young families, was sport or any kind of outdoor physical activities part of your life?
So yeah, I like young kids, it becomes difficult. I did a bit of mountain biking while the kids were younger, and then we moved up to Scotland, and I got back into road cycling then with what's now the Palermo Fitz Club, and that was probably when I started to take it a bit more seriously.
So there's quite a big jump, because you're not talking that long ago.
No, that was, when was that? 2010. So probably about 14, 15 years ago. And then when I turned 40, a friend talked me into doing a half marathon. I'd never really done much running. So I did that, did a full marathon, I think, the following year with you, which didn't go well.
What year was that again?
So I think that must have been, it must have been about 2015.
Right. And was that Kilda?
That was Kilda, yeah.
Why didn't that go well?
Because I let you pace me.
Let's be more specific. You asked me to pace you.
Yeah.
On probably one of the more toughest marathon routes that there is in the UK.
And I remember we sort of set out, I thought, this is, feels quite pacey, but it's doable. And then we got to halfway, and I realized I just set a half marathon PB and thought that's probably a bit ambitious. And then we got to 20 miles in. It was literally on Kilda wall that I hit the wall, and I've never felt so miserable in my life. In fact, I think I might have sworn at you.
There was some bad language, and then bugger off and leave me alone, I think.
Yeah.
And as you know, any consolation, I hit the wall about 20 minutes later, just further up the way, because it was a horrendous route. And how about triathlon then? So you've got all the cycling, you started a bit of running, and then how did you get into triathlon?
So once the guys in the, well, actually that was largely Peter's fault, actually. Once word got out, once word got out that I was enjoying running, and I did enjoy the running, but I didn't want to stop cycling. So then Peter and also Hamish was like, you should come join the Tri Club, and I still wasn't convinced. And then Claire was having back problems, so she started swimming. So I started swimming with her, and actually that was the last bit fell into place. So I started triathlon. I was trying to work it out. So I think it must have been 2018.
No, it must have been before that.
Was it? Yeah, maybe.
Because you and I did Everfeldy together in 2018.
Yeah. No, that was my first year of triathlon.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. So
I went. You've been at it for years.
No, so that's my first year. I did my first race was Selkirk, which is a standard, and then Aberfeldy was my second, and then I did Weymouth half Ironman that October, and then did a full Ironman the following year.
Yeah. Okay, we'll come to that in a second, because you've got the questions up front, so you know some of what's coming here, and you've pretty much answered this next question, which was about the disciplines that were your strongest and your weakest. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious from the way you've introduced that. So just spell it out for us. Which were the disciplines that you needed to do the most work on, apart from swimming?
Yeah, well, swimming by a country mile. And then cycling I've always enjoyed, but actually what I had to learn to do was to pull back a bit on the cycling, so I still had legs left for the run. That's probably, apart from learning to swim properly, has probably been the biggest challenge, because I would just go out, ride it like I was riding a sportif, and then can understand why halfway through the run I was going to pieces. I jumped too far ahead.
So at what point did doing it, I honestly thought that you'd started before 2018, because I know the story from later on in 2018 from direct experience, but at what point did the Ironman idea come into your head, and how did that happen?
Yeah, that was like my goal from the beginning. I think Jen actually had started riding with the Fit Club, and I'll say that story for another time. How I introduced myself to Jen by not looking over my shoulder properly before I cleared my nose. But I still owe her an apology for that. But yeah, then she was training for Frankfurt Ironman at the time, which kind of.
So that was the year before.
That was the year before, I think. Yeah, and that kind of planted the. See, I think I'd always kind of associated triathlon with Ironman. I didn't really think there were other distances. So that'd always been my goal from the beginning. So fortunately, I did have the sense to at least do like a half Ironman the first year before going on to full distance. Although I know lots of people.
So which was the first half Ironman then?
It was Aberfeldy that year we did it together.
In 2018?
Yeah.
Right, that was your longest distance. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so before that, I'd only done Selkirk standard. So
I enjoyed that race a lot, apart from you passing me on the bike at very, very high speed. But then trying to crawl back and pull it back on the run when I could barely walk was not much fun, I got to say.
Yeah,
But
I thought you looked much
than
more comfortable than that. Yeah, that was bizarre because you passed me on the swim and kind of like waved as you went past. It's like, what are the chances?
The only time I've ever seen anyone I recognized on the swim and actually had a chance to wave.
Turn my head to breathe, and there's Jim grinning at me.
He started about 2 minutes ahead in the wave ahead, and I pulled up next to someone, and I was like, wetsuit. Hang on, I think I recognize that. That's Warren. So the Ironman journey, then that first year, including that Aberfeldy, there was a few other things that you did to build up. Just talk us through the learning associated with, I've got this idea, I'm going to do Frankfurt, and getting to Frankfurt in that first summer.
So I think the main thing I learned that year was it was probably two things. Claire's looking at me now. Claire was ready to divorce me by the time we got to Weymouth. In fact, we had a massive row in the car on the way to the race. So I lost, I think, over a stone because I wasn't fueling properly when I was training. I got down, my normal weight's about 72, 74 kilos. I was 65 kilos by the time I got onto the start line. So I learned that you need to fuel properly, otherwise like you get really grumpy and you really upset your family. And I think I also learned that you need to bring people with you. So I learned the value of speaking to the people around you and telling them what you're doing and what your plans are for the week, not just buggering off at the weekend for a 6-hour ride and then coming back and lying on the sofa because you can barely move because you've not fueled properly. So yeah, I think that was the first thing I learned with triathlon, is kind of how to manage that training volume, how to like balance the training with family life. I tend to be a bit obsessive about things maybe, so I just like threw myself into it. And I think that's one of the other things I've gotten much better at over the years, is just, it's coming to that realization that you don't get better just by training hard. You also have to like look after yourself and eat properly, and
and your family
and your family.
So you don't get in trouble.
Otherwise, you end up, single, living in a bed with some lovely bikes.
As per that news article that was doing the rounds earlier this week.
Yeah, I was wondering if Claire had written it.
And then there was a few other races along the way. We were in Arran for the half Ironman Arran.
That was fun.
And Mario was there. Yeah. That was an interesting race in itself, with all of about 10.5 people.
Such a nice race, but stunning location. And that was my first and only time on the podium. Unfortunately, it was by accident.
I can tell that story, but tell us what happened there. That's very amusing.
So there were only 13 people in the race, I think, and so I knew where I was because you were counting people off as you passed them or they passed you, and I thought I'd come like in the middle of the field. I think I was 5th or 6th, and we were camping there, and there's not a lot to do in Arran, so we thought we'd go along to the finishing ceremony. And the guy's reading off the results, and he goes, so in 3rd place is Fred, and then in 2nd place it's Warren Barton. I'm like, what? Well, I can't not go up. So I went up,
I grabbed the camera, I'm taking
all these photos of you, and I walk up like this, and then get my medal, and then he says, oh, hang on, sorry, I've made a mistake. So I then had to give the medal I'd just been given to the guy who'd actually got 2nd. What he'd done was he'd been reading off the age group places instead, and because there were only 3 people in my age group, I'd come 2nd.
Of course, I wasn't laughing very much at all. I thought it was very amusing.
There's some brilliant photos of me like walking to, and then like skulking back.
And then we had Frankfurt itself, first time round.
Yeah, that was a
nice
introduction to a first Ironman. So that was all went brilliant. Like training went really well, and then about a week out from the race, it was starting to get quite hot, and we were looking at the forecast. And it's like it could be in the 30s, and it's like, oh, it could be in the high 30s. So I remember like us, I was like Googling heat adaptation training tips and like going in the car with the aircon turned full up to try and.
I had the heater in the garage with 3 days to go.
Yeah. And then we turned up there. It was got up to 38 degrees, I think, on the race. On the day, it was unbelievable. I think in fact, in Barcelona, I bumped into a German guy who'd been there. He was second in his age group, and he was saying it was the toughest race he'd ever done. So yeah, I mean, I think we both did incredibly well to finish it. I think it was like a quarter of or a third of the field DNF'd. It was unbelievable.
I called it the fourth discipline, the heat. I'll talk about transitions. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
The heat off the road as you came back into Frankfurt at the end of the ride and you hit the city. It was like cycling into a full-on like max sauna.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and the bike, the run was just terrific. It's just like trying to keep going. Yeah.
But there's showers and ice, and people just soaking themselves continually to try and keep through it.
Yeah. So so I thought that I mean I'd hoped to finish in about 12 hours, but like there was no way that was going to happen. So I think I did, I don't know, I think it was like 13:20, something like that. So I signed up to do it the next year.
Straight away. On the other hand, it killed off my interest in Ironman forever, and you signed up straight away for another one. So talk us through it. And then it was COVID, wasn't it? So you didn't get back. You were signed up.
I didn't make it back for, I think it was 3 years, because I did it 2 years ago. So yeah.
But you were signed up for the next one in 2020, and then, didn't happen, and you got deferred. And the next one didn't happen.
Yeah. So I think I eventually did in 23. In 22. Yeah. So the year before last.
So Peter, I think on one of the channels you were talking, you asked the question, it's already been answered about how much training you do and family. The worst thing was you trained for 3 or 4 years and you only got to race once because it kept getting delayed.
Yeah, I was like just so fed up with training for that race. But like in one way it was positive, because like during COVID when there was nothing else to do, I had an Ironman to train for. But by the like 3rd year of training for the same race, I was getting a bit bored with it. Yeah.
And then you eventually get back there on your own this time without me to carry your bags for you. And tell us about that one. Far more enjoyable because it wasn't that hot for a start. So how did that race go?
It was one of those, sometimes races just everything goes to plan. I think the conditions were great. I had a fantastic swim, like had a fantastic bike. The first half of the run was lovely, and the second half of the run was tough but like manageable. And I finished in 11:55, which was like, bang under where, pretty much bang under what I was aiming for. So it's just fantastic race. And afterwards I recovered fairly quickly, whereas like after the first time it took me ages to like recover. I was just absolutely wrecked.
And how was your training different? I mean, apart from all the years of waiting, let's cut to the last year, let's say before that race. How much, I mean, you obviously had a fair bit of learning over the years of training, but what was different compared to the first one perhaps?
Not a great deal really. I did more distance, and I'll talk about that a bit later, because I think that was probably a mistake. So I did some really long rides. I never need an excuse to long bike ride. I did some more long runs, and thought that was all all went very well. So yeah, but I more or less kept doing what I'd done previously. I was using the same training program as well, Trainer Road at that point, and it worked for me. Yeah.
Okay. And then you've had enough of Frankfurt. You decide now you're going to go for Barcelona. So it's a year later, isn't it? You're going to Barcelona.
Well, actually, no. So last year I was due to do Outlaw, but had to pull out due to injury. So I didn't make that race, and then decided to do Barcelona. Quite a few people like Dave and Cole had done it previously, and it sounded like a great race. I wanted to try and set a PB, sort of see what I could do on a really fast course, and I don't think you do. It's like pretty much Copenhagen and Barcelona are the two really flat Ironman events.
So that was only a couple of months ago or so now, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was beginning of October.
You absolutely smashed it. So what was your target or expectation, and how did it actually go compared to that?
Yeah, so so originally I wanted to see if I could do under 11 hours, and my training was going really well. My FTP was on the bike was higher than it had ever been, by a fair margin. And then I had a string of illness in the run-up, and so I had to kind of reset expectations. So I thought I might do about 11.5 hours at a push, and got there on the day and came out the swim bang on target, absolutely over the moon. Did the first loop of the bike course, bang on target power, and I was way faster than I'd expected to be. So I was like, oh, hang on, this looks like 11 hours might be back on the cards. So I actually eased off a little bit in the second half of the bike course, and then got on the run, was feeling great. And then I find it every time I get to the second half of the run, sort of like about kilometer 30, I start to like flag a bit. And I was chatting to this guy, and he said, I was like, really struggling a bit. And he was going, well, you like contracts go under 11 hours. And I was like, really? And then so did a bit of mental arithmetic and worked out that I was.
Which is not always that easy at that stage of a long race. Trying to do 2 + 2 is hard enough. Yeah. Never mind figure out your pace.
And then so I'd sort of been targeting 5:30 kilometers on the run, and then was walking through the feed station.
Which was some going at that. It's like 10 hours in.
Yeah, I was feeling really good until I got to like the second half. Then I started to flag a bit. And then after speaking to him, I was like, hang on, no, I'm just going to do the best I can, and managed to get up to sort of 6-minute kilometer pace, and looked at my watch just as I was coming into the finish line and realized I was like quite comfortably under 11 hours. So I almost skipped down the finish line. I was really pleased. But yeah, so it was all, I think there are probably 2 things. I think like I wasn't, talk about power a bit more, but like I use some software to model out my bike course and work out what target power I should be going.
We need another podcast for the geekiness of what you do in training.
Yeah. But yeah, so my prediction, I was way under my prediction for the bike, and I think part of it was like I worked out, I think I passed 800 people on the bike. Wow. So each time you're getting a bit of even though I wasn't drafting, I have to be clear on that, but every time you're passing someone, you're getting a bit of a benefit from that. But I also wasn't sure how air I'd be. I've been working quite hard on making sure I was in a good position. And
there's so many things I'd like to unpack if we had more time, but I'm going to cut to one thing, because I think from a newcomer's point of view in triathlon or any kind of endurance sports, whether it's half marathons, whatever, you've just said something a few minutes ago about the run-in to Barcelona, where you said there was a string of illnesses. When exactly was that in the run-up to the race?
So it was, I had to pull out of Aberfeldy, which is in August, I think late August. Yeah. I caught hand, foot, mouth off my grandson.
As you do.
And so that knocked me back quite hard, actually. I think
and the reason I'm interested in that is because it's not uncommon to hear in the amateur athlete world how people get very stressed about getting sick quite late on in a training program. But actually, sometimes it does them a favor, because being keen amateurs, we're all pushing a little too hard, and having that break forced on us by a bit of illness can actually indirectly have a massive benefit.
Yeah, I think it might have done. I mean, I had to reset expectations, because like my FTP on the bike definitely dropped. So I know, like, I do regular FTP tests, and I lost, I think it was 30 watts, which is massive. But for a while it was like, I'm just gonna go out, try to do the same power, and there I was, no, I have to like reset.
Well, let's pick on that there, because it's only a cyclist who gets that excited about their FTPs. Anyone else get excited about their FTPs? You're cyclists if you do. I know what my FTP is, but I couldn't give 2 flyings on it when I'm actually training. So we've had this debate before about heart rate versus FTP. We won't go too far on this, we haven't got that much time, but you train to power, you race to power. What is it about power that gives you that information you need, as opposed to any of the other bits of geeky data we can all collect?
Yeah, so how to explain this succinctly?
In about 45 seconds.
So the thing with power is it's absolute. So there's no arguing about it. It's not like your heart rate. If I have coffee, my heart rate will be higher. if I'm tired, my heart rate will be up. Whereas like power that's just what your legs are producing. You get instant feedback when you're on the bike, whereas your heart rate will lag by about 30 seconds or so. So you can pace really well. And the big problem I have is, coming from a cycling background, I tend to push too hard on the bike. So riding to power means I can make sure that I come off the bike with my legs okay for the run.
Okay.
So yeah.
And
so
how many bikes have you been through in this whole journey? And how many of these does Claire actually know about?
You know, the right not to incriminate yourself, that extends to podcasts, doesn't it?
Yeah. No one's listening. It's fine. Just you and me.
Well, I'm down to only 3 bikes now, which is actually fewer than Claire's got. So
Okay.
yeah.
Roughly how many since 2018?
Yeah, I think two time trial bikes and 3 road bikes and a gravel bike. That's not much though, is it?
I could probably compare that to my pairs of running shoes. I can't do that on a bicycle, but as coming into triathlon from running, I've been through I kept track of how many pairs of running shoes I've been through, but not that many bikes, that's for sure. You missed one key element, and I know it was a feature of various races, like the pizza in Frankfurt year 1.
Yeah.
But this was a recurring thing, Warren, and have you finally fixed this problem? And maybe you should explain what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so Jim poisoned me with pizza the night before Frankfurt. So I've got a bit of a delicate digestive system, should we say. I've realized I'm very sensitive to salty food. So
particularly just before a long race.
Particularly just before a long race. So so I just won't even try and describe porta potty at the tail end of an Ironman when it's nearly 40 degrees. But yeah, I'll just leave that to the audience to imagine.
So I've got to add quickly, it reminded me that there was a stretch, it was a 2-lap at Frankfurt, 2-lap bike. And there was a stretch where you go out and back. Now I knew I was going to be in front of Warren in the swim, but I knew he was going to pass me on the bike. And he hadn't passed me at any point. And I knew I would see him on the out and back, where you go out and then you cycle against everyone. And I was like, I'm going to see him at some point. And I didn't see him the whole race. And that's the reason why. Was it 9 or 10 minutes and a 40 centigrade?
Right, it was, and I had stopped more than once.
People get penalties that are not as bad as that. Penalize itself. All right, we're approaching the end. Aspirations for the future.
Well, as anyone who's spoken to me in the last few months knows, I've got a place for Kelpman next year.
Very exciting.
Very exciting, slightly terrifying. But I've got an amazing support team around me.
I've been practicing my map reading.
So I'd like to try and get a blue t-shirt for that, but I've been crunching the numbers and I know that's a real stretch. So that's my big goal for next year. Then I need to finish my masters, and then I'd like to go back to Barcelona in 2026 and see if I can get a bit closer to 10 hours. I'm keen to do that again.
10 hours after Kelpman, that's the target.
Yeah, we'll see. It won't be next year because I've got doing the final year of my MBA, so I start again in March. So trying to do in fact,
and a not insignificant birthday coming up and a change in age group.
I go up in age group, yes. So
very exciting.
Yeah.
The only part of life where we can't wait to get older. Good. Any questions from anyone in the room before we wrap?
I've got one. Do you think you should do a marathon in preparation for doing an Ironman?
As part of training, yeah.
So let's repeat the question the question was, do you feel you need to do or should do a marathon as part of your training for an Ironman?
The longest run I did this time around was 2 hours, which I think is more than enough. And certainly, like everything I've read is, as soon as you go over that, the risk of injury outweighs any benefit you'd get. So yeah, I would say definitely not. Half marathon is plenty, I think, in terms of distance.
And with all the other training that's going on, the long bike rides and the long swims, you're building up huge endurance. You're never going to string together a 12-hour, 13, 14, 10-hour, depending on what your race targets are, training event. So when it comes to the day, you're going to go way beyond anything you've done in training. But Dave, this is your area of expertise, and we'll come back to you in a future podcast and we can really get into this kind of stuff in great detail. Any other questions?
Yeah, certainly. I'll ride close to the bike course once or twice in prep. But yeah, I wouldn't do super long runs.
Coaching question. They use train peaks. Different people need different things from coaching. So a lot of people use a physical coach, a person to coach them for Ironman training.
Yeah.
Why did you choose not to use?
So the question here is, you use Training Peaks and something else?
I use Tridot now.
Tridot and Training Peaks. So virtual coaches basically, as opposed to in-person, real life next to you, looking in your face coaches.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I work in technology anyway, so I think that probably appeals to me a bit. I think like there's quite well understood formulas almost for trotting out what you should do at what point. So I think those sort of like AI type training platforms now are quite sophisticated and work quite well. I think what you miss is, and it probably would have saved me some of the mistakes I've made, is that support and advice that you get around just go out and do, run this distance or ride that. So I've had to kind of learn some of that stuff through trial and error. I've read a lot of books. I sort of like researching things. But yeah, I've definitely made some mistakes that I think a coach would have avoided me or would have stopped me from making. So yeah, I think for me, it was mostly about the cost. I spent the money on bikes instead.
I got one last question to finish. Anyone else got anything else to squeeze in between?
Talking about the cost, do you have power meter pedals, or how do you measure your FTP?
Yeah, I've got
power meter pedals or measuring your FTP. Kind of how do you do it?
Yeah, I've got crank-based power meters, but I think if I was going to recommend, I'd get pedals because they're easier to move between bikes. Yeah, I do a fair bit of training indoors, especially if you're doing intervals on a bike. Trying to do that outdoors is just dangerous and difficult. So yeah, I spend.
So is it static bike RAM tests you're doing for your FTP, or are you picking it up automatically through your training?
Yeah, my previous plan would do RAM tests. The current one I'm on makes you do a full 20-minute FTP test pretty much once a month, which is brutal, but it's they recommend it because I think there's a few reasons. One is actually having the discipline and that like mental fortitude to get through a 20-minute full gas effort is,
So that's flat out for 20 minutes, not ramped.
No, so it's just holding the highest power you can for 20 minutes. So what I try and do those outdoors because like doing it indoors is just horrific.
Yeah, although I think it sounds horrendous, but when I think about a fast 5K can be part of a running program. You're doing that as hard as you can all the way, and they'd say that's the best way to get your max heart rate measurements, doing it flat out 5K.
So once it's pretty much once a month I'll have like a week of testing where it's a recovery week, but you do an FTP test on the bike, so 20-minute FTP test
in recovery week,
a 5K. The rest of it's just sort of easy stuff, and a CSS test, and then it sets your zones for swimming up.
So that's probably why you go on the virtual rather than the in-person, because in-person would let you off that. It sounds horrible. The virtual says no, keep going. Can't see you. Yeah. All right, let's finish off with worst moment ever, apart from the 40 centigrade potty at Frankfurt. Worst moment ever in a race or just in training, and obviously we've finished then with the best moment you've had in triathlon.
Yeah, I think Aberfeldy, after I'd done Frankfurt the first time, I'd basically done nothing for 6 weeks. Turned up there expecting to smash it because I'd done a full Ironman before, and then the weather was awful. I hadn't done anything with my bike, so I got to the first of that lovely climb up Schiehallion and realized my front derailleur wasn't working. So I had to like get off the bike and physically move it to switch gears. So I rode most of it in the wrong gear, and then just had the worst run. I ended up with a groin injury that persisted for months afterwards.
Yeah, I think I'd take the porta potty over that one. And best moment?
I think that's a tough call. Keltman Solo 0.5 this year, finishing that was a fantastic race, but it's got to be like running down the finish chute at Barcelona, knowing I was comfortably
very
111 hours.
recently.
Yeah. I don't know if it's because that's still fresh in my mind, but yeah, that was. Although actually running down the finishing chute at Frankfurt that first year was a big relief, though, rather than
To get that over. Yeah, exactly. And then 5 guys burger afterwards, so it couldn't exactly help much. Yeah. Warren, thank you so much. Great to have you on as our first one. Thanks for doing this. It's kind of helped, I hope, to set the scene for everybody to see how this works and what it's about. We'll be back in January. We'll set a date for that very, very soon. And I can tell you now that the next person that we're going to be talking to is Claire Dow. She will be up next. So we'll get a date together for January. Thanks very much to the few folks who showed up to make the audience. Thank you, Warren. And see you again at the Christmas party. And then the next one of these after that. Thanks again. Cheers. Bye.